Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Don't sit down, or you'll die. A Life, a Look. New York, one December evening. The wind cut like a blade between the skyscrapers, biting skin and whipping faces. The snow, which had fallen heavily earlier in the day, had melted beneath the hurried footsteps of passers-by, forming icy rivulets along the dirty sidewalks. Vapors rose from the manhole covers, and police sirens echoed in the distance like the metallic groans of a city that never sleeps, but often forgets its own. Under an old Brooklyn bridge, forgotten by the world but familiar to the lost, a man knelt before a dented tin can that he had transformed into a makeshift brazier. He struck a match with the slowness of those who know that every flame is precious. His name was Caleb Brooks, 46, once a professor of quantum physics at a Midwestern university. Today, nothing from his past seemed to follow him, except for a frayed backpack and a yellowed notebook that he kept close to him like a talisman. His bushy beard partially hid a face sculpted by cold, lack of sleep, and years spent surviving. His fingers, reddened by frost, trembled slightly, but his gaze, that gaze, remained sharp, piercing, almost scientific. He had lost none of his ability to observe, to analyze, to deduce. For months, Caleb had settled there, under that bridge. He knew every crack in the concrete, every particular sound of the city at that precise spot, the hurried footsteps of bankers in the morning, the laughter of high school students around 4 p.m., the heavy silence between 2 and 3 a.m., that time when even thieves sleep. But that evening, something was wrong. The sound of tires screeched in the darkness. He turned his head and saw a shiny black SUV, which pulled up too quickly to be insignificant. The passenger door flew open. A man in a three-piece suit got out, without pausing to close the door properly. He was tall, well-groomed, and nervous. He held a phone to his ear and spoke loudly and urgently. "Yes, I'm almost there." "No, I don't have time to go through reception, I want it to be discreet." The man walked briskly, his shoes splashing in the icy water, completely absorbed in his call, his face set, his expression annoyed. He seemed too preoccupied to notice that he was entering a dimly lit alleyway, hidden from view. Caleb frowned. Something was wrong. He squinted, accustomed to making out silhouettes in the dark. His heart, accustomed to the cold calm, suddenly accelerated. To the left, just above an old, unlit street lamp, a hooded man stood motionless, as if frozen in shadow. Too motionless to look out. And to the right, behind a dumpster, a figure barely stirred. Caleb saw a metallic glint, a cold reflection, a syringe held in a gloved hand. Not a doctor's syringe. An improvised syringe, ready to inject anything. Caleb understood. He understood the scam, the trap. This rich, distracted, alone man was being lured into a blind zone, to be knocked unconscious or injected with something to incapacitate him. Perhaps to steal, perhaps for blackmail. Or worse. And he, Caleb, this homeless man that no one saw, was the only one who noticed the scenario. He felt his breath catch. His heart pounded loudly, like a war drum in his chest. He looked around, no one. No police, no witnesses. He stood up slowly, as one stands up to the inevitable. His stiff legs protested, but he forced them. He grabbed his old cap and clenched his fists. He knew he would have to intervene. It wasn't his fight. But it was his moment. The man in the suit walked straight toward an abandoned chair, sitting curiously in the center of the alley, as if someone had placed it there with sinister intent. A wooden chair, rickety, solitary, out of place in such a hostile setting. But the man didn't see it as a warning. He simply saw it as a possible rest stop, a discreet corner to sit, breathe, finish a call. What he didn't see was the trap. More Caleb, he had understood. He leaped forward, forgetting the icy nights, the hunger digging into his stomach, the pain in his hips. A flash of adrenaline shot through him, and his cry split the darkness like a clap of thunder. "Don't sit down, or you'll die." The scream echoed off the dirty walls of the alley. The man jumped violently, stopping in his tracks. He looked up, stunned. A figure appeared out of nowhere, a man in rags, his face lined, his voice panting. "What is?" His voice trembled, half surprised, half annoyed. He didn't understand. He still didn't understand. But Caleb, he didn't have time to explain. A shadow suddenly appeared on their left. One of the men crouching in the shadows leaped forward like a wild beast. In his hand was a long, sharp knife. The blade's flash cut through the darkness like lightning. Without hesitation, Caleb threw himself between the two. His body collided with the wealthy businessman's, pushing him back. He narrowly dodged the first knife blow that whistled past his ribs. He staggered, but held firm. "Back off," he yelled. The attacker snarled, struck again, his gaze full of hatred. Caleb ducked, raised an arm to protect himself. The blade cut into his sleeve and skin, sending a sharp heat into his shoulder. He gritted his teeth. But before he could react further, a second man emerges from the shadows, younger, more nervous, and far more dangerous. In his hand, a homemade syringe, with opaque, brownish, threatening contents. He charged straight at Caleb, the needle aimed at his throat. Caleb spun around, his fist clenched, and punched the man in the wrist. The syringe fell to the ground with a thud, shattering against the concrete. The attacker screamed and lunged at him. Caleb, knocked off balance, couldn't avoid the next blow, a brutal hook to the face. He collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his burst lip. But he was still fighting. He was screaming. Loudly. Desperately. "Help! Police!" he yelled with all his breath left. The first attacker was already charging back, ready to finish him off. Caleb, on his knees, raised his arms to protect himself. He had no more strength. It was over. And suddenly. Of the sirens. Blue flashes in the distance. Voices in loudspeakers. New York Police Department. "Drop your weapons, hands up." The two attackers froze. A second of hesitation. Then, like rats sensing a trap closing, they fled, darting through the alleys, disappearing into the darkness. Calm returned abruptly. Nathaniel Whitmore stood a few feet away, dazed. He hadn't moved since the attack. His shirt was wrinkled, his phone lost, his breathing short and raspy. His eyes were wide, like a man who had just stared death in the face. His gaze slowly slid down to the floor, where Caleb was huddled against a graffitied wall, his face bloody, his breath labored. He approached, trembling. The sirens were already fading, other officers were pursuing the attackers. You saved my life," he breathed. Caleb looked up at him, one eye swollen, the other barely open. He shrugged slightly, the corner of his lips lifting in a tired grin. "You don't have to be rich to recognize a trap," he murmurs. Nathaniel knelt beside him. He didn't hesitate. Despite the blood, the grime, despite the pain that weighed on him, he took Caleb's hand in his own. A rough, calloused hand, but firm. "My name is Nathaniel Whitmore," he said in a trembling voice. I owe you my life." And Caleb looked at him, slowly. The name rang in his mind like a bell. Whitmore. This name he had seen so many times in newspapers, on laboratory buildings, in televised debates. P.D.G. Whitmore Industries, a pharmaceutical giant, a billionaire, accustomed to closed circles and polished interviews. A man criticized for his coldness, his detachment, his faceless empire. And yet, there, in the light rain and the dying neon lights, he held the hand of a man New York no longer even looked at. Two worlds had collided. And nothing would ever be the same again. At the hospital, two worlds come together. The hospital's fluorescent lights created a harsh, almost violent light. Caleb Brooks lay in a cot, his arms covered in bandages, his lip split, a purple bruise marking his temple. His body bore the scars of a night too long. But his eyes were open. Calm. Present. He wasn't sure what he was doing there. People had told him he was a miracle, a hero of circumstance. But in his head, there was no glory, no victory. Just this strange image haunting him, a rich man about to fall into a crude trap that no one had seen except himself. A few hours after admission, Nathaniel Whitmore had returned. This time without a suit. Dark wool sweater, ordinary winter coat. No tie. No escort. Just him. Drawn features. A distressed look. He remained silent for a long time, watching Caleb from afar, as if the latter were an enigma that no equation could solve. Then he walked over, pulled out a chair, a real one this time, and sat down quietly. "I keep replaying the scene," he murmured. "You knew. You saw what I, with all my technology, all my security, didn't even see coming." Caleb slowly turned his head towards him. "This isn't the first time this kind of trap has been set. Abandoned chairs, syringes, dead corners without cameras. These are street codes. You live above them." Nathaniel nodded. He had the look of someone who was beginning to see things differently. "I want to help you. But not out of charity. Not to ease my conscience." He took a deep breath, as if to weigh each word. "I want to offer you a place to live, care. And above all, a place by my side. You saved me, and I need you." Caleb frowned slightly, suspicious. "Why me? There are hundreds of guys like me out there. Why give me a chance now?" Nathaniel looked him straight in the eyes. "Because you saw me. Not as a name on a building. You read a situation I would have ignored. And I realize I've become blind to essential things. I need people who know how to read the world differently. You are one of them." He took an envelope out of his pocket. "I have a project going on in one of my labs in Brooklyn. A pilot program on the urban security and sensitive human environments. I want you to be a consultant. Not a name on a paycheck. A real perspective. A counterpoint to my world." He added, almost timidly. "It won't be much at first. But it will be yours. Not as a favor, but as a bet on the clarity of a look that we often forget to listen to." Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked out the window. It was gray, like it always is in New York in December. But for the first time in years, the horizon no longer seemed entirely empty to him. He nodded slowly. "Okay. But I come as I am. Not as you would like me to be." "That's exactly what I want," Whitmore replied. Caleb moved into a small apartment in Harlem, modest but welcoming. One room, a working shower, a bed without broken springs. A forgotten luxury. He received new clothes, but continued to wear his old coat for a few more days. Out of habit. Out of memory. On a shelf, he placed an old notebook he had kept for all these years. A notebook yellowed by cold and time, filled with formulas, thoughts, fragments of observation. He began to write again. Not theories. Things seen. Felt. Learned in the street. He walked a lot. He observed. He noted. And little by little, he became what he had always been, but what society had forgotten, a thinker. A man capable of seeing between the lines. Nathaniel Whitmore, for his part, did not remain the same. This rescue, this night, this scream in the alley, all of it had become a tipping point that he understood that a company that claimed to save lives without ever listening to those who survived day to day was worthless. He launched a national program under his foundation, Second Sight, a professional reintegration program for homeless people with neglected skills or experience. Far from charity, this program offered a bridge, a structured passage, jobs in the technical, social, artistic and scientific sectors. He created listening centers and field analysis, drawing inspiration from the stories Caleb shared. These stories, raw, poignant, filled with astute observations on violence, exclusion, failing urban planning, even changed the way his engineers thought about urban projects. A few months later, at a televised charity gala, Nathaniel Whitmore spoke to an assembly of notables, researchers, and politicians. I'll tell you something. That night, I didn't almost die from a knife or a syringe. I almost died sitting on a chair. An ordinary chair, in the middle of an alley. A chair placed there to catch men like me. And what saved me wasn't my money. Nor my name. It was a scream. The cry of a man I could have ignored. Today, this man is my advisor. But above all, he is the conscience I thought I had lost. He taught me to look at what I refused to see. The room rose to applaud. Quietly, at the back, Caleb, dressed in a simple but clean suit, watched the scene with his arms crossed. He was not looking for light or recognition. But that evening, he was no longer invisible. He was the eye of reality, become voice. A few years later, Caleb published a moving book entitled, Don't Sit Down. It was neither a political essay nor a classic autobiography. It was a collection of stories, raw, poignant, sometimes heartbreaking, straight from the street, written by hand, one by one, in the fragile light of a modest apartment. Each chapter was a voice, that of a forgotten veteran, a woman forgotten after a lifetime of work, a young man deported too soon, or an abandoned old man. Caleb wrote not to stir pity, but to awaken. He called for listening to the voices society left by the wayside. The title, Don't Sit Down, had become a symbol, a cry of resistance as much as an invitation to inner vigilance. In the introduction, Caleb wrote, Don't sit where you're expected to fall. Don't sit on your certainties. Don't sit down when life calls you to stand up. Because sometimes an abandoned chair is a trap. And sometimes what you think is rest is surrender. The book became an unexpected phenomenon. Initially distributed on a small scale in community libraries and rehabilitation centers, it reached a much wider audience. Universities taught it in courses on social ethics. Business leaders used it as inspiration to review their internal policies. Even politicians cited it. Caleb was invited to conferences, broadcasts, debates, always discreet. He spoke little about himself, preferring to highlight the testimonies he had collected. He refused to be transformed into a heroic figure. At a major humanitarian forum in Boston, Nathaniel Whitmore, now a committed philanthropist, took the stage and told an audience of leaders. Caleb didn't just save me from an ambush. He saved me from my own blindness. What I've done since, I didn't do to repay him. I did it to finally be worthy of that cry he uttered. In the assembly, Caleb, standing back, looked up for a moment that he wore a worn but elegant jacket, and in his hands he still held the same notebook, with its dog-eared pages. He wasn't looking for light or glory. What he wanted was for no one to ever again walk past another human being as if they didn't exist. And that evening, in the silence that followed the ovation, a simple sentence, coming from a heart that had seen too much of the bottom, resonated in everyone's minds. Don't wait until you're on the ground to understand that you had to get up.